Welcome, everyone. I love that this whole front row is filled up. Check this out. That is engaged. Love it. Welcome to Anxious and Faithful, Understanding the Importance of Mental and Spiritual Health. I'm Fitz Green. I'm on staff here at the Study Center, and we are so glad you're here. We're so excited to be able to do things like this again and to be able to feed you, which, if you hadn't already caught on, pizza will appear there right after the lecture. So do plan on hanging out and talking some more and getting some pizza. So we chose this topic because last year we did something during COVID on depression and anxiety, but it was in the middle of the highest restrictions. We had to limit it to 6 people who could come. And we knew that more than 6 people were interested in this topic, right? So we wanted a do-over on the one hand, but on the other hand, we also heard from people because we had publicized that earlier event. Man, I'm so glad that you were doing something on that because I just don't hear it talked about in my church, or I don't hear it talked about in my fellowship group. And so that really was the thing that made us say, hey, more than just a do-over, we really do need to be talking about this. It really is an important thing to be able to talk about. So we want to talk about it. We want to talk about it as Christians, too, and from a Christian perspective. In part, I think that means holistically. How does a view of mental health fit within the whole biblical story? How does it fit within the way the Bible talks about who we are as people, what a person is, and do justice to the whole of what we are as physical and mental and emotional and spiritual beings? And so that's why I'm really glad that Tim Jones is here tonight. Tim is on staff at New City Counseling. He's the director of New City Counseling. And he's been on staff since 2009, is that right? 2008, okay. That's right around, we had been in Charlottesville just a couple years when you started that. So he's been there quite a while, and he has both a Master's of Divinity and a Master's in Counseling from Covenant Seminary. And I think that's a really cool combination, because what Tim has in his training and has to offer for us is both a theological look at mental health and that training and that perspective, and also the practical running a counseling center, meeting with people, knowing what people are struggling with and what the reality is. And I think that mix is such a gift, and there's such wisdom that can be brought there, which is why I'm so glad to have Tim with us. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all. I'm actually not going to do all of that Fitz said. I'll come back another time and do some of that stuff, but it's great being with you all, and we at New City are big fans of the Study Center and what you all are doing here, so we're thrilled to partner here. So I do want to start just by asking again, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about mental health right now? And if you've been paying attention to the news stories, the headlines, you will know that mental health is having kind of a moment right now, right? And in some ways, that's exciting for us. Mental health awareness for counselors is a good thing, right? You think about in the sports world, Simone Biles, the gymnast, and Naomi Osaka, right, talking about their own mental health struggles and how important it is to not hide those things, right? Those are good things for us, and we want more of that to happen. But on the other hand, it's a little troubling because there's a lot of hurting people right now. A lot of hurting people, and they're hurting deeply. And so to have mental health having a moment is a bit disconcerting for us, right? And so, again, if you've been paying attention to the headlines, one of the things you may have heard recently over the past couple of years is that we are currently experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. There was a study done by the Harvard Graduate School of Education recently, a national survey of American adults. And that survey, 36% of recipients reported serious loneliness, which is feeling lonely frequently or almost all of the time in the previous 4 weeks before the survey. And this included 61% of adults ages 18 to 25. More than half of the adults in your age group reported to feel lonely almost all the time. That's serious. An epidemic of loneliness. The other phrase you will hear, and you've heard over and over again, is we are in a mental health crisis, right? The CDC did a study recently showing that 63% of adults 18 to 25, 63% are suffering clinically significant symptoms of anxiety and depression. And finally, the New York Times this past year surveyed over 1,300 mental health professionals around the country. And what they heard from their patients, a number of words they heard from their patients. They heard burned out, overwhelmed, depressed, stressed. But the most prominent thing that they heard, emotion they heard over and over again was anxious. Anxious over and over again. And instead of focusing this evening on just sort of mental health broadly, but I want to focus on this particular emotion, anxious, anxiety, to go a little bit deeper. And it's the thing that we are hearing anecdotally, we're hearing this from our own clients at New City Counseling over and over again, especially in the last 2 years. And it's the thing that I'm feeling the most in my own person, my own body, and my own family. Anxiety. So we have to ask the question, why? Why are we experiencing this new age of anxiety, this mental health crisis where anxiety is so prominent? Now, there are some obvious answers to that. I mean, we are in a global pandemic, right? It's an obvious thing that makes us anxious. There's real questions about whether our democracy will hold together. Produces some anxiety for us. We're in a time now where we hear about things like climate change more and more and more, and what's that going to mean for our future. It causes some anxiety. But then there's things like seeing black and brown people killed over and over again. And even if that's not personally impacting you, it's another layer that kind of lays on top of what we're feeling. Or another school shooting happens, and it's almost like old hat. These things happen over and over again, and we're kind of numb to them, but it's part of the layer that lays on top of what we're all feeling, right? But what's true about you all, specifically, your age group? And your age group is the first generation to be born after 9/11. Or maybe not born, most of you were born after 9/11, I'm assuming, but in terms of your sort of cognizant awareness of life, after 9/11, which was this moment where our world changed, where global terror became a threat that was always there. And even if you don't hear about it all the time, even if things seem like they're kind of under control, again, it's like pressing, another thing that presses upon us, right? The pace and the breadth of our online culture, and again, you are the first generation that has only known an online culture, right? This is where you live and exist much of your life. The pace and the breadth of our online culture that we all at some level exist in, it keeps us always behind. We can never quite catch up. We can never see all of the clips or hear all of the music or whatever it is. We're always behind. And especially for you college students, and this is true, at least from our experience at New City, seeing a lot of UVA students. You were created with limits. God created you as a limited being. But you are told over and over again that you not only can, but you should do whatever you want and achieve and achieve and achieve. And so to exist in limitations feels somehow wrong. And that is anxiety producing. And again, we live in this consumer culture where you're bombarded all day long on this thing you hold in your hand with consumer marketing that tells you, its very job is to tell you, you don't have what you need. You need to have this thing to be okay. And it's constantly telling you the same message over and over again. And if you don't have what you need to be okay, well then, you're not enough. And if you're not enough, then maybe you're going to end up alone or lonely. So that fear that's driven by marketing firms in New York City that comes to you through your phone that tells you you're not enough, if you don't have this thing, is constant. And whether we're aware of it or not, it presses in on us. So all these things, or anxiety in its nature, is about these future fears that keep us stuck living in the future. But none of us can live in the future, right? We have to live here. But we live in the future trying to what? Control the future. But none of us can control the future. And so we live in this constant state of spinning, of anxiety. So there's this swirling world around us that's pressing upon us. And then all of us have these swirls inside of us. We all have our personal reasons why we experience anxiety, right? It's not just all this other stuff out here. It's that, but it's also the internal stuff. And so the question is, how do we faithfully live in the midst of a culture of anxiety and our own anxiety? And I think what Christians are often told when confronting anxiety is, don't be anxious, right? Pray. Now, those are both biblical concepts, right? But not super helpful when presented that way, right? Have more faith, just trust God. Again, very biblical. But it doesn't actually get into the contours in our experiences of where we are. We need more than that. And I believe that God has more for us, other than this sort of sanctified version of stop it. Okay. So what is it that God has for us? And I'm going to turn to a passage in the book of John, one of my favorite passages. And it's not one that we often think about when we think about anxiety, but I'm going to try to stretch it a little bit, okay? In a very orthodox way. So this is John 4. This is the woman that Jesus meets, the Samaritan woman. Fitz and I were just talking about how small this print is. Oh my gosh. All right. John 4. Give your attention to God's word here. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come to this here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband.' For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on the mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming. He was called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." And a little bit further down, 39 to 40 here. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me all that I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days, and many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." This is God's word. So, what do we learn here? And I want to say just 3 things that we learn about anxiety here, and where we are to go with it, where we are to take it, how we are to understand it. And the first is what Jesus does here is he calls this woman to an embodied presence. An embodied presence. So Jesus does not begin, if you notice, this conversation with her or this encounter with her with a theological or philosophical conversation. Like he doesn't do that. What does he do? He says to her, "Woman, can you give me a drink?" Now, there's a couple things you have to know, and if you heard this passage preached on, which I'm sure many of you have before, you probably already know this, but 2 really important things to know here. One, when John says that he had to pass through Samaria, it's not true. he didn't. Right? Jews would not. They would do all they could to avoid going through Samaria. Right? They would go around at their peril to avoid the Samaritans. Samaritans were anathema to the Jews. And so when John says he had to pass through Samaria, he's telling us something different, which we'll get to. But the other thing is, this woman is coming to the well in the middle of the day, the worst part of the day, the hottest part of the day, to come draw water. She's coming because she does not want to be seen. She does not want to be engaged. Right? That's why she's coming at this time. Now, what do you think this woman is feeling when she comes to the well in the middle of the day to draw water and this Jewish man begins to talk to her? Right? Now, you heard how I did her voice when I was reading it, right? But I think the text actually gives us some indication. Have you ever talk to somebody, have a conversation with somebody, and you can tell they're anxious, and sometimes their speech gets really fast and really disjointed, and right? This woman is coming and just kind of giving all these words to Jesus, right? She's anxious. I believe she did not want to be seen, and she's trying to hide. And what Jesus does is he calls her back to herself, back to her body, back to her presence. It is my experience with myself and with everyone that I know, that we deeply struggle to be present with ourselves, with our emotions, with our bodies. And if we can't be present with ourselves, with our own emotions and our own bodies, we can't be present with other people, truly present, or with God himself. And there are so many things in your life right now that are calling for your attention constantly. We're accustomed to give our attention to all kinds of things all the time without even thinking about it. To certain voices that come at us, we give our attention. And what this giving of our attention has done or is doing to us, right? How it is shaping us, how it is forming us, and how it is interacting with our anxiety is a question I think we need to sit with and think about. What if this indiscriminate giving of our attention is really a hiding from ourselves, a hiding from other people, a hiding from God himself? And I think we think about this word hiding, and we typically think, biblically at least, of the concept of shame, right? When we're ashamed, we hide our face, we hide ourselves. But I think this is actually a really primal and core emotion, hiding, that has to do with fear and shame. If we think about, for example, attachment research, modern attachment research tells us that babies and little children, when they feel disconnected from their caregivers, many of them display what they call an anxious attachment style, which is, I'm going to do all that I can to get back the attention of my caregiver because I can't take it, I can't stand it that I'm out of connection. It makes me afraid. When I feel fear, I get anxious. I have to do something about it, right? And again, if you think back to the beginning of the biblical story, just after the beginning, Genesis 3, what do we see there? The man and the woman were afraid, and so they hid themselves. They were afraid, so they hid themselves. Now, they couldn't really hide from God, but they didn't want to be seen because they were afraid and they were ashamed. I'm going to read a quote from a theologian named Jeff Vogel that gets at this. He says, "Perhaps there is no veil intervening between us and the heavenly world other than the one we wear over our own lives, the one we have adopted to keep ourselves from being fully seen. It is not heaven that has yet to be fully present to us, but we who are not yet present to it. Not heaven that is away, but we who are away. We live in hiding from God and one another, not first and foremost because we cannot bear to see, but because we cannot bear to be seen." And it's my contention that when we feel anxious, when we act out of anxiety, we're doing that often because we're hiding from ourselves and from other people. So what I want to do now is a little exercise that I hope you'll indulge me with, okay? And what I want you to do, if you're comfortable, is to get relaxed in your chair. If you have a pen or paper, you can set it down for a moment. Because what I want us to do here is to try for a moment to get present. And part of how we do that is to regulate our breathing, okay? If you're comfortable closing your eyes, sometimes that's helpful for people. And I want you to feel your back against the chair, make sure you feel comfortable in how you're sitting. And I want you to begin with some breathing. I want you to begin with a 4-count breathing in and a 5-count breathe out. 4 in. And 5 out. And I want you to keep that rhythm going of 4 and 5. And even as you're breathing, as thoughts are coming into your head, as you're smelling food maybe, or as you're anticipating food, or you're thinking about your next exam, just let the thought come by, like you're watching an airplane fly across the sky. Just let it go. And the next thought that comes, just let it go. And instead of focusing on your thoughts, I want you to give your attention to your body. What is your body feeling right now? Where do you feel tension or stress in your body? Often we hold stress in our jaw. Check in with your jaw and move it around. Our neck and our shoulders. If they're tense, drop your shoulders. Sometimes our hands. Chest. Expand your chest. Keep breathing. And take one more breath in and one more breath out. And from this place, you can open your eyes if you want to. From this place where we become present with ourselves and in the room and in our bodies, it's this place that we can actually begin to hear God. And the question that I want you to think about is, what do you want? What do you most want? If I had a truth serum to give all of you, I bet I would hear answers like, I want to be known. I want to be seen. I want to be embraced and loved. That's what I really want. And if I ask you, who do you want to be? Like at the core, who do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? You might say, I want to be a stable person, like that tree in Psalm 1, who doesn't get swift all around with the wind, but that's stable and secure and planted. That's what we want. But we begin to admit those things to ourselves, to speak them. We can almost feel some of the anxiety begin to rise again. What we realize is we don't feel that way a lot of the time. We don't see ourselves as that kind of person. And we want to get back to hiding, right? To distracting. And I think this brings us to the second thing that I want to say about our anxiety and what Jesus does here in this story. Because what he does next with this woman is he brings her back into her own story, right? He does it gently and calmly, but he brings her back into her story. And he brings her back into some of the hardest parts of her story, some of the most shameful parts of her story. After calling her to attention with him and with herself, and dialoguing with her, engaging her longings, he brings her into some of the hardest parts. So even though anxiety by nature is future-oriented, right? It's about trying to live in the future and being worried about what's going to happen in the future. I think oftentimes it is rooted and fueled by the past, right? And sometimes it can be the very recent past. Okay, so in my own life, my wife passed away 5 years ago of cancer. And after she died, for about 9 months after that, whenever I would have any kind of ache or pain or anything, I would be deathly afraid that I had cancer, right? And so this was a recent experience, and it was causing my anxiety to go up the roof. Oftentimes, though, it's a further back past experience or series of experiences or events. Maybe you experienced betrayal as a child, and that has caused you to want to lock in and control your life. Maybe your childhood was pretty disorganized, and you didn't have a lot of stability, and so you want to control the future. And so the fuel behind this anxiety is really rooted back there. So what we do, because we don't want to go back and look at the stories and feel them and be present with them, we distract ourselves from ourselves. And just like Jesus calls this woman into her longings and to himself, the one who heals and rewrites her story, I want to ask you, where does your anxiety offer a window into your story? Where is it rooted in your past? What needs to be healed and rewritten in the story you're believing that's fueling your distraction now? So Jesus, in this story, calls her to presence. He calls her to her story. And finally, he calls her to a new practice. So we become what we practice, and our desires are shaped by what we practice, what we do over and over again. And like I said in the beginning, we are often not even aware of the things that we're doing over and over again. We just do them, not realizing how they're shaping us. My family and I, about 2 weeks ago, went out west and saw the Grand Canyon for the first time. It was a phenomenal, unbelievable experience. And I had heard this in school, that the Grand Canyon was formed by the Colorado River doing this in the wind, over and over and over again. But when over 6 million years, so a long time, right? But when you see it, it's unbelievable. And the Colorado River is not getting out of the Grand Canyon. Like, there's no way, right? It has caused this groove so deep over time with practice that it's stuck. What are you practicing? If you pay attention to the details of your daily routines, what will you find? How are they impacting you, and how do they intersect with your anxiety? You can see in this story, this woman's daily practice was interrupted. Her daily practice of going to the well in the middle of the day when no one's going to be there, she can do her own thing and she can not be bothered, it was interrupted. Right? And it's almost like the water jug is the metaphor for her kind of practiced life of shame. And she leaves it, and she goes to the village, and she tells everyone about Jesus, and like the village gets like converted. Right? It's an incredible moment, redemptive moment. And then what happens? The camera leaves her. And she now has to figure out what to do with this relationship, what to do with her longings, what to do with her practice of making her life work in these serial relationships she's been in. She has to now figure out how to make new practices, a new way of living. What if her practice became one of paying attention to her present, right? To listening to her past, and to replaying or meditating on the love of Jesus for her? What other practices would this create for her? What would these new liturgies mean for her anxiety? And what about for you? If you're paying attention, right, to the things that you pay attention to, the things that occupy your time, and evaluating, are these making me more anxious or more present with myself, with other people? What if we began to see our anxiety as an invitation and not just desire symptom relief from it? Now, I want to say, just pause for a moment and say something about symptom relief. We do see a lot of people in our practice who struggle with anxiety, deep anxiety, and it's horrible. It's terrible. It can be debilitating when it's like clinical anxiety. It's terrible. And we want to relieve symptoms. And oftentimes when people have really, really deep anxiety they're struggling with, it gets in the way of so much of their life, right? So don't hear what I'm not saying. If you have that kind of anxiety, there's really important clinical and medical interventions that I fully support, okay? To get you back into a place of sort of where the rest of us struggle with anxiety, right? And then when you get back to there, these same questions are there for us, right? And if our anxiety is actually an invitation, a window into this deeper relationship with Jesus, and we slow down our bodies and our breath and listen to what is there, what will we find? What if we stop distracting from our unmet longings and the pain of our past and instead began to practice sitting and listening? So like I said, anxiety is primarily the experience of trying to live and control an uncertain future. And I believe that God calls us back to the present, sometimes having to deal with the past in order to move into the future with practices of God's continuing presence with us. I want to just close here with a poem, a blessing from the priest and poet Jan Richardson. And it's called Blessing in the Chaos. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stillness of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness, or feel the grace that fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find the peace you did not think possible and see what shimmers within the storm. Thanks. So I would love to engage now with any questions, thoughts you have, either about what I've said or about anxiety in general or about anything else. Yes?
When you say like people has anxiety because they are hiding from something, so can you give me like 2 or 3 examples of like what usually people hiding from?
Yeah, good question. So the example I gave in my own life, right, of my wife passing, I think I got busy doing lots of different things. So I got lots of different new hobbies. I started, I was on my phone a whole lot more. Lots of different things came into my life to distract me from what just happened, right? But I think it can happen in more subtle ways. I think that you can give yourself, for example, as a student, I'm going to study and study and study and study and study until I make this grade. And why is that grade so important to you? Because I was told, either directly or indirectly from my parents, that if you don't get this grade, we won't be pleased with you really. So to be okay, I have to do this. So the distraction from yourself and from God is like something good you're supposed to be doing, right? Or a distraction can be something like exercise or watching what I eat to the calorie. That can be a good thing to exercise and be healthy with how you eat, but when it's rooted in, I will only be okay if I look a certain way. And that message came to me from my past, recent or far past, right? It's this frenzied living that's rooted in a past message about yourself, something you need to become to be okay. Those would be examples of what I was talking about.
What is hiding from to be okay? What's the thing?
So what you'd be hiding from is actually engaging those things in your past, right? Those messages in your past that said to you, you're not okay, right? Those messages from parents, teachers, coaches, whoever, who said to you, either directly or indirectly, you're only okay if you do this, if you achieve, if you whatever. We take that in to our hearts and begin to spin and perform. But we don't address the thing. We hide from that by getting busy. That's the hiding. Yeah.
Could you repeat the name of that poem that you closed with?
Yes. It is called Blessing in the Chaos by Jan Richardson.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
I have one, but I'm already here, so I wanted to, see if any students had a question. One thing that you mentioned was that we have to be conscious of like what we think about and whether it's driving us like towards anxiety or towards people. What do we do with things like the news, where it's like we actually should care about, like police brutality and things like that, but it does cause anxiety. Like, how do we balance
That's a great question.
not hiding from those dark things,
Yeah.
but also not letting them cause us to spiral?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. Yeah. Because we can take a posture of, oh, the world is too scary, so I just need to clamp down and not look at the news anymore and hide from it, right? Which is not what God calls us to do, actually. It's the opposite, is to actually become engaged. And I would say it this way, we can't be actually faithfully engaged on the spinning outside, right? The sort of spinning world outside that's like chaotic, in effective ways until we've dealt with or are dealing with the chaos spinning inside of us. Because if we do not deal with this and we go out and try to engage, we actually harm people. Right? We're not actually present with why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it. And so I would say it really is and we never fully arrive there. So it's not like I'm going to get fixed first and then I'll go out and do the things. I think it's a both and, but it is attending to yourself first in order to kind of faithfully engage outward. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. When you mentioned something about being able to look back in your past and rewrite your story, we can't change our past. So what can that look like when you say it? Does that mean being able to think about our past in a different way? Is there something that Christians are able to think about their past differently and say rewrite your story next time you experiment?
That's a great question. Yeah. One of the ways that a New City Counseling, one of the sort of formative theories that shape us is something called narrative therapy. And narrative therapy was developed by a guy named Michael White, who actually, and he's a secular guy, and he said, actually, though you can't go back and change your story, you can't, literally rewrite your story, you can go back and think about, imagine, envision your story differently, and it actually changes the way that you perceive it. Now that's borrowed from the Bible, okay? Because when Jesus comes and redeems us, he doesn't go back and change the things that happened to us, change the facts of them. But he gives us these new glasses to put on them. So when you hear a message like, you are nobody unless you achieve, for example, and that shapes how you live and how you do, Jesus changes that. And you can go back with new lenses on and say, that was not true. That was a lie. And I can go back and actually look at that and how it impacted me then. And I can grieve. I can be with that part of myself and grieve. And actually it can change the way that I see my story. Right? So we're not rewriting the events of the story, but we're rewriting the interpretation of the events of the story. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So after you have like given yourself space to have silence, what would you recommend in order to get more comfortable with all the emotions that come through that?
That's a great question. Yeah. So part of what I would recommend you doing, all of us doing, is, yeah, because silence and what comes can be something to be overwhelming, right? It can be a little bit scary. And so if you're practicing like a meditation like that, and you find yourself becoming overwhelmed by what's there, I would recommend talking to a friend and maybe finding a mentor to talk to say, what's coming up is too much, right? But oftentimes it will be not overwhelming, but just a little bit like niggling, like, I don't really like that. And when that happens, I actually want you to push further into it. Like, be curious about what's there. What is that little thing that we don't want to really move into? What is it? What is it telling us? What does it feel like? Where do you feel it in your body? Right? That's some of the work you could begin to do to see, where does it attach back to my story and the place that actually needs healing. So our emotions can tell us that, our body can tell us that in ways that our minds often can't. Someone over here had a question.
I just had a kind of side comment based off your advice to her about like thinking about our past. Could you add, how you carry that burden with you today to that?
Say more about that. I think I'm tracking this.
Yeah, there's like a song that I relate to about like, this is my cross to bear, this is my story to tell, is the lyrics. And so you have this burden, you reflect back on it. And you reinterpret it, but you also carry it with you in a more positive way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that work actually begins to have an impact on how you relate to yourself and people now, right? That's the idea of carrying it forward as God redeems those things, and you can actually walk with more freedom in your life. And yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
You can.
So being a Christian, how do you respond to people tell you like they're struggling, obeying, or keep the commandments, and when they are not doing it well, then people say the only way you can go to heaven is you have to obey to God and keep all those laws, commandments, and especially for the conservative church or Catholic or even Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
What do you usually suggest them in response to this kind of anxiety?
Oh, that kind of anxiety of having to keep all the commandments.
Yeah, I'm not doing it well.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm so glad that we don't have to, because that would be incredibly anxiety producing, right? Because we're failing all the time. So the fact that Jesus kept the commandments perfectly on our behalf, and we put our faith in him, and by putting our faith in him every day, he empowers us to actually be faithful. I can breathe a sigh of relief instead of get spent up in anxiety. And that's the wonder of the gospel, that I don't have to do it because I never could. None of us could. So that's how I respond, with a big exhale.
But they're always saying if you are not doing well because you didn't work it hard enough or you didn't pray it hard enough,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the suggestion you should give them?
Yeah, I would say that's not the gospel. That's a different religion that I would say run away from that one. It will harm you. Yeah.
This might be like a weird or complicated question, but like when in that silence and you hear, you're maybe like prayerfully listening, and maybe you hear your own voice and you're trying to just discern the difference between like what God might be saying to you, what you're saying to you,
Yeah.
or, you know, what someone else is saying to you.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how to?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah. Whose voice comes in, and which one do you listen to, and how do you discern what is God's? Oh, yeah, I have the answer to that. No, just kidding. No, but I will say this: like, when a voice of accusation comes in, okay, that's not God. And oftentimes those voices that come in from our past have that kind of tone. So you can tell already that one's not God.
Or if it's a person from your past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes the form of your own voice. We use this sort of self-talk we've learned over years to keep us motivated and going. You're so stupid. I can't believe you did that. You know, no one's gonna like you if you do that. Like all that stuff. Those voices will come in. It's your voice. It's just a lie. It's an accusation. Right? And so that's a borrowed voice. Like Satan borrows things, and that's not God's voice. So that's one thing you can distinguish. When it's a voice of encouragement, of love, of tenderness and kindness, like that's God's voice, right? Whether it comes via a parent or a friend or a mentor or your own thought, thinking, oh, that feels good. that's God, right? That's all I got. Yeah.
That's wonderful, and I agree. But I would just suggest that we should run all of our thoughts against Scripture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the older I get, of course, the more I learn God's Word. I've read it through now over 67 times since I was converted.
Even Leviticus.
I've read it.
That's awesome.
The more I read it, the more I learn it, the more I understand it, and I compare it against my behavior. my
Absolutely.
Everyday behavior.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of an objective thing.
Yeah, and when Jesus was tempted in the desert, he came out with God's word, right? If it's in you, it will come out of you and, and toward you, right? And yeah, that's a good word. Yeah.
It's got kind of two parts. Would you be willing to paint a quick picture of depression in comparison to anxiety? Mm-hmm. And then what happens in a spiral? Like, how do you break a spin? Mm-hmm. Like, once it could be depression or anxiety. It just feels no longer rational. Mm-hmm. And so, ideally, catch it before it comes, but once the vortex comes.
That's a good question. Yeah, what do you do?
Yeah.
So I can't quickly paint a distinction, but I will say, so if just generally speaking, if anxiety is living in the future, trying to live in the future and control the future, depression is living in the past and being shaped by the past, right? And that controls. So that's the basic distinction. Depression would be a whole other talk here, but the spinning, the spiral, sometimes it takes the form of like intrusive thoughts that you can't stop, right? And so the people who've got like I said, clinical depression, clinical anxiety, they actually need usually to be medicated for a time often, or to do some like significant like cognitive behavioral therapy where you're really doing like, you're taking capture of these thoughts that are coming in, and you're having all these really important techniques to tell yourself something different when those things come, right? But I will say that breathing thing we did, it's really hard to be anxious when your nervous system is calm. Now, sometimes it can be really hard to calm your nervous system when you feel like you're spinning, but you can do it. It's incredible. Your body can actually do this. It takes practice, but it's really hard to be spun up when your nervous system is at a steady, sort of regulated state. Right? So I would say practice that. You'll get better and better at it, right? And then you can actually calm yourself. Yeah.
This one's more for you, but how have you been able to carry someone's pain and to listen to someone's story without it affecting you and your internal peace?
Yeah. I have to have people that I'm talking to regularly, and I take self-care very, very seriously. So like I exercise. If I'm not exercising regularly, then I'm not doing well, right? So the things that I know that I need to have to be doing for my own self-care, but the biggest thing is people that I have that I can let them into everything and don't have to care. I can't care for myself by myself. So, and I would say that's crucial for all of you who carry each other, bear each other's burdens. Like, make sure someone's bearing yours as well, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a big one, but what does it look like for God to like interact and understand anxiety when like he doesn't feel it? Because you've got like love and fear, and I don't know if God feels fear, but anger. It feels like some of these, at least Jesus maybe, I don't know.
Oh, where's
but
Bill?
It's a hard one.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it like he knows our frame. He knows that we are but dust. Like he knows, he can see inside of us and doesn't have to have experienced, this is the wonder of God, doesn't have to have experienced all the things that we've experienced. Like, for example, if I feel guilty because I've cheated on my spouse, which I haven't, I don't want God to have cheated on his spouse to be able to feel what I feel. In fact, I want him not to have done that. I want him to be pure, but to be able to have sort of grace and forgiveness for me, but still be able to see me. And I think that's the wonder of a holy God who's also full of grace, is he was perfect, but yet is compassionate. So I don't know the answer to that exactly, but I'm grateful that he can. I guess I'll say it that way. It's a great question, though. You're a philosophy major? Any other questions? Yeah.
I want to know the difference between two things. The first thing is I just ask when somebody is struggling obeying the laws, the commandments, and if the church or someone tell you like that's because you didn't pray hard enough or work hard enough, then your suggestion is stay away from the church. And the second thing is when I tell someone is suffering from the laws, the commandments, and you say have faith on God and pray, what's the difference between these two things?
I have more questions about your questions, so can I catch you after this? And because I want to actually ask more questions about, so I can understand what you're saying exactly. So yeah. It's a good question, but I want to get more. Okay. Yeah. Last one.
Yeah, last one. Great.
Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned the nervous system and keeping like a stable nervous system. Can you talk about that in relation to exercise and how, is there a connection there between like having a steady nervous system and regular exercise?
That's a great question. The short answer is I'm not sure all the connections between them. When I think about a regulated self and a regulated nervous system, I think about it in terms of how our emotions, whether it's down-regulated or up-regulated, right? How they either spin up or they go down. And so I think indirectly, if you're exercising regularly and it helps you feel calmer or actually be regulated in that way, then I think it does impact it. I'm not sure sort of biologically how that works. A good question. All right, thanks you all so much for your activity.
I'll let you talk to some folks.